Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Bevavino, host of the Mobius Connect podcast, focused on connecting military veterans to the maintenance and reliability community. Our aim here is to bridge the understanding gap between the military and civilian worlds, thereby improving the veteran transition experience and ultimately providing hope and a helping hand to any of our brothers and sisters out there struggling to find their way. We'll do this by interviewing veterans who have successfully made it through. For this session, we've chosen to interview one such Air Force veteran, Terry Southall, whose fascinating and patriotic story is a must listen for anyone interested in joining us on this mission. Hey, Terry, thanks for joining us. Where are you calling in from today?
I'm in Panama City, Florida.
I know it well. Home of the Navy Dive School and the Navy Experimental Diving Unit. But you weren't in the Navy, were you?
No, but it's also the home to Tyndall Air Force Base, which is the training center
Ah,
for F-22 and F-35 pilots. So it's a pretty good area to be in, I think.
it is a great area and beautiful white sand beaches and crystal blue waters. Pretty
Yes, sir.
place.
Yes,
Popular
sir.
spring break location too, from what I understand.
If you're a if you're a resident of this town, it is horrible for summer. But if you're not a resident of this town, this place is a blast to come for summer. So it depends on your perspective on what you're looking at. But I was born and raised here, so um, went through high school, started college, but didn't finish here. So the roots that I had here, I came back to. It took me a little while after the military to do it, but I eventually trickled back here, and this is where I plan to retire. So.
Nice. Great place to retire. I love it. Well, Terry, we were connected through the Mobius conference in Milwaukee, and I've been looking forward to talking to you on the podcast ever since we had that conversation and our subsequent intro call, which we really went through a lot. Hopefully, we can cover as much of that as possible here. But why don't we start by talking about who you are today and what you do today, and then we'll dial it
Okay.
back to the early years.
Okay, so currently I am the global brand and distribution manager for a family-owned company out of Danbury, Connecticut, named Hamar Laser Instruments Incorporated. Martin Hamar started the company in 1967 after developing the first laser aligner, working for a company called Perkin-Elmer back in 1965. So in 1967, he opened his own company, took that laser aligner that he developed with Perkin and Elmer, or excuse me, Perkin Elmer, and advanced it. By 1969, Perkin Elmer no longer manufactured lasers, so it was strictly Hamar Laser in the United States. So I work for the oldest active laser alignment company in the world, which is kind of an interesting statement to say. So we are the only US based laser manufacturer as well. Everybody else manufactures their lasers either in Europe or in the Middle East. So it's an
Hmm.
opportunity for us to be the one and only made in America, manufactured in America laser alignment tool. We're also only in specific laser aligners, so we do not provide any other service besides manufacturing and support of laser alignment tools that we create. So it's kind of a nice little adventure there. So that's where I'm at. So my job, I work on the shaft alignment side of laser alignment. And so my support group and who I support is on that side of the company. I do dabble on the other side, which is geometric. So if you think about aligning, if you were to walk into a distribution center and name any of these large manufacturers that have, or large uh, retail companies that have huge manufacturer distribution centers, our lasers can apply geometrically to those systems, conveyor systems, different types of actuators, um, um, extruders, different types. That would be geometric. So angles and perpendicular, parallel, straight, flat, all of that is a geometric application. And then when you get to, let's say, a motor and a pump, well, the motor and a pump are connected by two shafts. The two shafts connect in the middle with what's called a coupler or some type of connection. So the shaft alignment is connecting, making those two shafts be in the same line with each other, be exactly centered to each other. That's what shaft alignment does. So that's where I'm at in my current state, is I'm over the shaft alignment side of the company. We have 39 distributors all over the world that I support, and we do a lot of branding, advertisement, uh, initiating discussions, uh, exhibits. I do a lot of papers. So it's the idea is the awareness to make sure, especially in the United States, that there's a company there that's made in America, that supports Americans, but also sells globally as well. And we believe in the product that we make. So it's an opportunity across the boards on what we do. So when you ask what I currently do, I live, eat, and breathe laser alignment, to the fact that I'm pretty much so passionate that the folks at Mobius were gracious enough to allow me to talk about it multiple times. So this is just another time for me to get that little bit in there before we talk about me and my actual career and gotten. So
yeah, and it's a nice setup because I mean, look, you're doing a lot of stuff. You're passionate about maintenance and reliability, laser alignment, which I'm guessing you had some experience with that, or maybe exposure while you were in the military, maybe not, but it's pretty important. At least you had exposure to multicultural business activities or operations when you were in the service. But yeah, like, I mean, just for the folks who are listening that don't have a full appreciation for laser alignment, what would be the worst case scenario, say, if a gearbox in a hot strip mill wasn't properly aligned with the motor that was driving it and everything in between? What would be a worst case scenario if that wasn't aligned properly?
well, depending on what the product is, that gearbox is centered around. So let's say there's dust in the air. Let's say it's at a lumber facility, or if it's at a chemical facility.
Hmm.
Uh, Bearings, when they fail in many ways. And typically, as a condition monitoring expert would say, they can identify the types of failure depending on what they read using their vibration equipment to be able to tell what's going on. So they can find premature failure as it happens. So as the intensity of that bearing, and what we're talking about bearings is the shaft that comes, the inboard shaft that goes into the gearbox has a bearing on it to allow that shaft to be centered before it hits the gears inside the gearbox. And the outboard gear or outboard shaft has the exact same thing. So what a gearbox is designed to do, is designed to take the speed coming from the motor and either reduce it or enhance it to make it either go slower or faster on the other end. So when that bearing fails, that fail could cause the gearbox to stop, or it could just cause the gearbox to overheat. So as a bearing gets to the extremes, they can catch on fire. There is grease, there is oil, there is consistence of heat that can be generated to cause a bearing to tear itself apart and create a combustion effort. Now, depending on where that system is, if there's dust in the air, there was a sugar factory, I want to say in the early 2000s, in one of the southern states, and anybody can look that up and read about it. The sugar factory explosion. What happened was they had the bearings covered, so they were in a containment, and so the dust, the sugar dust that was there, you wouldn't think sugar is is combustible. Um, when that bearing seized and it caught on fire, the dust around it caused an explosion because of the expansion part of where it was at, which continued an explosion throughout the entire facility, and very catastrophic for both the company, the employees that were working there. A few people, I do believe, lost their lives in that. So there, when you talk about alignment, what we're doing with alignment is we're trying to make sure that the components that are installed on a system are taken care of to a point that the failure happens a long time from now as time based and not influenced. As a human being, we introduce error into every component. It's inevitable. Error happens, but if we can mitigate a lot of those errors, for instance, an alignment, if we can align it to a precision state instead of a rough state, then the lifespan of that equipment, that gearbox, has a longer life expectancy to make that happen. It doesn't mean it's going to fail some other way. It just means that the motor that's turning that gearbox is aligned to it to the point that we've reduced amp draw, which reduces cost. We have a precision alignment, which allows both pieces of equipment to last longer than what they're supposed to, because as they get out of alignment, they get hotter. They start to bounce and vibrate all over the place. So they affect more than just the alignment itself. So there's a lot to do with that type of alignment.
Perfect. Perfect. Well said. Clearly, you've done this a few times. I think it was Imperial Sugar in Savannah, Georgia, if I'm not mistaken, because I did a little bit of work there in my maintenance and reliability consulting selling days on their lubrication program after the fact. So yeah, it was a chain reaction type of particle in the air type deal that was caused by bearing. Crazy. Yeah, people can die.
It's interesting to watch the video and the secondhand accounts for what happened for those survivors that were in it, and then the investigation that happened. So I don't talk about that as often as I should, because catastrophes do happen. We have catastrophes in the industry all the time, and unfortunately we the mitigation, I mean, safety in the 90s, 80s, and 90s is not what it is today. A friend of mine who's not in the military, he worked at a paper mill all his life, and in the 90s, it was either June or July, he was doing something that he was told to do, and the piece of equipment that he was on slipped, and it cut off the tip of his index finger. So that's sad. But the fact is, he would say, I was the 6th amputee of that month. And they celebrated with a fish fry because they only killed, and I'm saying this openly, they only killed 3 people that year. And management considered that, the ownership of that facility in the 90s considered that a win. So it's safety has come a long way. We just, and I really harp on this, and I got this from working with a previous company that I still support to today. One of the things that was said to me by Ian McKinnon, one of the founding fathers of precision maintenance, he said, I kind of want to go back to what I want to say. I'm trying to think of what I was going to say. Hold on, Eric. So we may have to pause this one and cancel this out. What was I just talking about? Because I kind of went on a tangent there.
Ian McKinnon and precision maintenance and safety and not killing people. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm ready to come back. So Ian McKinnon, one of the founders of precision maintenance, when he talks about safety, one of the things he keys in on is precision and reliability. If a piece of equipment is more reliable, then the interaction of an individual is going to be less, which increases the safety parameter. The more we touch a piece of equipment, or the more we go back to a piece of equipment, the odds or the chances of us having an incident, it exaggerates by thousands of percent every time we touch it. So by putting reliability in the same realm as safety, the focus, because we're in lean management, we're in, everybody's wearing multiple hats, everybody's all over the place. So mechanics are being pushed back and forth, operators are being pushed back and forth on what they're supposed to be doing. And a lot of times it's a misstep, or somebody is pushed in the way that they shouldn't be pushed, and an incident happens. So when we talk about interaction within it, and I learned a lot of this in the military too, is if we went back to manual based steps, or if we went back to specific training requirements on a quarterly biannually basis, where everybody's going back to the core concepts of what their jobs are supposed to be, then we would mitigate a lot more of that safety issue, and we would improve the reliability of those facilities. The problem is it's not an issue until it becomes an issue, and I think that's where industry as a whole is a really good firefighter. Everybody is really good at reacting. Being proactive is a really tough job because we don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. Another statement that Ian always says, and another gentleman, Tom Carr, they would always say, every technician, every operator, every supervisor, every manager, all they want is a good day. They just want to have a good day. They want to be able to walk in and not have issues and have a good day that day and be able to go home to their families when their shift is done. So, that's the expectation. Well, that's how everybody lives. If we live to have a good day, then maybe we can be a little bit more proactive in what we do. And that's something I think the military, when I was in, it seemed like we were a lot more proactive than reactive. We were still reactive. I'm not going to say that we weren't, but I'll say that we were a lot more proactive in what we did, especially in the career that I was in.
Right on, right on. Well, why don't we dial it back to that then, Terry, and tell us a little bit about how you got into the military, why you got in the military, and what'd you do in the military?
So I believe it started in high school. So I played football up until high school. So back in our day, we didn't have middle school. Middle school was its own school, and then we had junior high school, and then we had high school. So, sixth grade was your middle school, seventh, eighth, and ninth went to junior high, and then 10th, 11th, and 12th went to high school. And when we transitioned from ninth to 10th, the ninth graders came over with us to high school. So I was only at the bottom of the class when I was in seventh grade. And immediately when I got to 10th grade, I was not at the bottom of the class because the freshmen came over as well. So I was fortunate enough to not be shoved in trash cans because my height never got past ninth grade. I'm the same height as I was when I was in the ninth grade.
Is that right? Yeah.
So my football, I just got slower. The guys got faster, and I just got slower. So I actually got into wrestling, and I wrestled all 3 years of high school, and I enjoyed it. And when I got out of high school, I did not have a plan. I really didn't want to go to college, but I started college right there in the community college, right there in Panama City, Gulf Coast. And I got one semester under my belt, and I really didn't see it. Let's back up. I didn't want to go in the military at all. I wanted to be a state trooper for the state of Florida is what I originally wanted to be. Okay. And I wanted to get the criminal law degree. So that way I could become an officer in the trooper corps and not just be a patrolman. And so the very first class, I'd already taken most of my prerequisites. The very first class I took was a criminal law class, and the gentleman was a retired detective from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. That was our instructor. And there were 38 of us. I'll never forget this to this day. You remember a lot of things, even as you get older, and I'll never forget this. There were 38 of us in that room. And he looked around, he said, half of y'all are not going to come back next week. He goes, and then half of that's not going to come back on the second week. And then a third of that's only going to come back for the last week. And this is only a 6-week class. We're only going to have about 8 or 9 people that's going to graduate this or pass this class. Everybody else, you're not going to pass. And he goes, and I'm going to prove it. The first thing he showed us was, he goes, criminal law deals with criminal law that happens throughout the place. And we're talking about accidents, murder, whatever the case may be, negligence, but it deals with death. And unfortunately, the majority of criminal law is death at a certain realm. So you have to be able to absorb that and not have feelings and not have flashbacks or whatever it is. So the very first thing he showed was a car accident. And he was not lying. After it was a two days a week class. It was a Tuesday, Thursday class. Thursday was when we went through the entire detail of it. On Tuesday, half the class was gone. We were like down to like 18 people. And so 18 people were in there. And the very next week, and I stuck it out, the very next week, we went through another grouping and we were down to 9 people. And I was number 9. 8 people graduated that class. I made it 3.5 weeks. And I left that class and I realized that I just did not want to be a state trooper anymore. I just, what I saw and what he went through.
It's not for everybody, right?
Yeah. Not for everybody. Yeah. And I commend those that do it. So the idea was, I didn't know what to do. And my dad, the father that raised me, my stepfather, I'm not calling my dad, he did not want me to be a bum. And he was ex-military. He was in the Air Force. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. But his statement was, I don't want you selling jet skis. They didn't have wave runners back then. I don't want you selling jet skis on the beach your whole life. You need to make something of yourself. So you have an option. You can move out or go do something. And he said, why don't you join the military? And I thought about it and I said, okay. So went to all the recruiters. I went to the Navy first, and you and I had this discussion. You being a Navyman as you are, they talked it up. I took the ASVAB. I did really good on the administrative part. I did really bad on the mechanical and electrical, and I don't remember what the fourth part of it was. But with the Navy, they were like, oh yeah, well, you can be a nuclear technician is what they call it, I think at that time, a nuclear technician. That just sounded awesome. I could work with nuclear fission, and they talked it all up. And the one word that really stuck out when he was talking, and I mean, he said it so fast, you would have missed it in a conversation. The word submarine piped up, and
that was it.
Kind of had a
no Navy for you.
Say, wait a minute. Does that I would be in a submarine? He goes, yeah, chances are you'd be in a submarine. So I told him I'd think about it, and I just, as soon as the door closed, I'd never even looked back. I was like, no, this is not for me. The crazy thing is, in Panama City, there's a mall, a small strip mall, where all the recruiters were located, and some of them are still at the same location. I walked past the Marines because I did not feel I was capable enough in my stature of being a Marine, because I just don't feel that I had what it takes to be a Marine. And Marines will remind me every day, because I do have a few friends that are Marines, that I would have never made it. So I graciously bowed out before I even walked in. The next one I talked to was the Army. The Army recruiter had actually tried to recruit me before while I was in high school, because I wrestled. And one of the things they wanted to do is they wanted me to be on the Army wrestling team. And that was kind of a big deal. And so he once again talked me up. Here we go. You're going to be a wrestler for 3 years, and we're going to have a 6-year commitment for you. But the last 3 years, you're going to have to be an infantryman. So what is an infantryman? It means you carry a gun and you do as you're told. And I'm like, okay, that means I fight. I don't know if that's really fight or rent jet skis. What are my options here? So I'm really not sure what I want to do. And I didn't have a commitment there. So I told him I'd think about it. And I immediately walked next door to the Air Force. The Air Force was there. And the technical sergeant, the E6 that was there, he said, what do you want to do? And I said, I have no idea. And he said, all right, let's look at your ASVAB scores. He looked at it and he said, admin is probably the way you want to go. And I said, well, I'd really like to be a mechanical. Let's do something mechanical. It was really low. I think it was a 58 on my score on the ASVAB. It was pretty low. And he said, well, I can't guarantee you a job, but I mean, I can get you in the mechanical field, or would you be interested? And I said, what do I have to do? And he goes, well, and he laid it down what the expectation was. He signed me up since I had a semester of college. I had a total of 45 credit hours, almost 60 to get my associate's degree. So I got enlisted for 6 years, and I agreed. And I did a delayed enlistment in June of 1990 with a start date of March 1st of 1991. So I had about 8 months to wait from the time I signed the paperwork and went to the MEPS, the military entrance, and started that military protocol of signing an oath and all of that stuff, to the point where I got on a plane and I went to basic training. Problem is right in the middle of all that, we kind of had a little incident with a country in the Middle East that invaded another country in the Middle East, and we said no, and off we go to stop that from happening. So Desert Storm, Desert Shield obviously happened in January of 1991. And when I joined, everybody told us we were not, as soon as we graduated basic training, which was a 6-week affair, we were immediately going to go get crash course training on whatever our job was, and we were going to go straight over to the Middle East and deal with the situation that was happening. Well, that didn't really happen. So basic training, Lackland Air Force Base, San Antonio, Texas. I survived it. It was, I would say it's a lot. I talk with a lot of friends, and I have a lot of friends from different branches. And I will say that the Air Force is probably the easiest of the boot camps because a lot of it is mental. It's not physical. In the Air Force, 3% of the military is in combat. The other 97% is mainly support. And that's what their job is, to support those 3% to be as accurate and active as they can. And so there's a lot of interaction that support does. And when I say support, that doesn't mean we're not in the fight. It just means we're supporting not only anybody in the battle with the Air Force, but Army, Navy, and the Marines as well. So that's one of the things that we are trained to do is be good under stress, being able to keep a steady head while everything is falling apart around you. It's like assembling a gun. A Marine or an Army infantryman can reassemble a gun without any thought of mine, even in the most stressful situations. Well, the same thing happens when I have to make an executive decision, or I have to make a decision that could affect others in a moment's notice, and be able to provide that information without hesitation. That's one of the things that they do. So they drill that into. We did a lot of PT, we did a lot of that, but we did not, hike for 25,000 miles in one afternoon with 10,000 pounds on our back, uphill while it's snowing, and downhill while it's while we're in a hurricane. So we didn't do that in basic training, but we did get the opportunity to do a lot of the physical stuff that was there. And I, it's for those that have dropped out of basic training, because I know quite a few of those as well. It takes a lot out of you, and it takes a lot of you to pass all of that. So
yeah, without a doubt. And it's a good example of, that the military perhaps glamorized, the combat roles are glamorized, but there's a lot of support behind the combat roles, and certainly the men and women in combat roles have an extreme amount of courage and bravery and ability to manage that. But there are also people behind the scenes that support that effort and help them get where they need to go with the right intel and the right equipment and the reliable stats and information to help them complete their mission. So yeah, right on, man. Yeah,
I didn't know yes, sir. And I didn't know what career field I would be in. I didn't know my MOS, my career field, what I was going to be doing in the military until 2 weeks to graduation of basic training. I was placed in a position of what's called antenna maintenance specialist. A 3AO position is the classification that it is. And what an antenna maintenance specialist was, and I did it for the first 8.5 years that I was in the military. It's outside communications. So when you see somebody up on a telephone pole and they actually hiked it up like a lumberjack, and they're running cable across, and they're mounting power lines and cable lines and all that kind of stuff on a telephone pole, that was me. Or if you saw somebody working on a tower, today they're called cell phone towers, but in the 80s and 90s they were transmission towers. They sent data transmission via either satellite or microwave transmission. So they're a radio transmission as well. So we built those towers, either stationary where they're just on a big platform, and that's what you see on the side of interstates today, or guide towers, the ones that have guys. Most you see them blinking at night. If they're over a certain number of feet, they have to have lights on them. So that's what I did, was towers, ran cable from anything from rigid coaxial cable, similar to the cable that you plug into the back of your television to get standard local channels, that cable, just imagine it 10 times bigger and doesn't bend like the one behind your TV does. And then network cables, networking cables, but not single strand like you would plug into your laptop or your desktop. We're talking multi-strand. The cable is this big around. I mean, it's huge. It's 12 to 36 inches round, how big these cables could get. And then fiber optic cables, so the fiber optics system. So that's pretty much what I did for the first 8 years. And I went straight from basic training to Shepherd Air Force Base to get that training. There were only 3 Air Force students in that class. There were 5 Marines and 2 Army in that class as well, in the class that I was in. And we went through many weeks of training to become proficient in doing our job to make sure not only we were safe, so we got safety instilled in us, but we also got process instilled with us and repeatability instilled with us. So that way, you learn your process and you continue your process. So when you get to your next forwarding base, then you're able to apply that without somebody having to retrain you. So it was the basics to be able to get you into it, almost like an apprenticeship level. You go to be an apprentice millwright, you have to go get training, and typically that's done through a community college or some type of training facility that teaches millwrights the basics of how to become a millwright. So there's a step process. Once they become an apprentice, once they become an apprentice, then they move into the facility. That apprenticeship continues on until they get to a certain level. They become a journeyman, or they become a class 1, class 2, class 3, depending on how that facility has it set up. So once you get done with your tech school, and your tech school is the same way, your dive school was the same way as we discussed. So you're going to get repetitive, so it becomes second nature. So you never have to think, was I supposed to do this? You're just physically doing it. So we learned
muscle
a lot.
Memory.
Muscle memory, what they call brain to gut memory also. So you're never thinking about it when you do it. First station was off at Air Force Base, Omaha, Nebraska. I was not on the base itself. Since I worked in communication, I was in what's called a receiver site. So I was in an antenna field. It's still there today. It was called Elkhorn Receiver Site. Elkhorn, which used to be it is now Northwest Omaha. It got absorbed by Omaha, Nebraska, in the late
urban sprawl, right? Yeah.
So as it grew, so Elkhorn technically doesn't exist anymore, but that site still has antennas spread around the main facility, and there's other facilities around it now in a cornfield. So I literally worked in a cornfield and had to drive through corn to get to certain antennas, and it was, depending on which antenna you were dealing with, whether it was a poled antenna where a whole bunch of poles, just think of a whole bunch of telephone poles that make a circle, and then wire wraps around it and makes it almost like an elliptical sphere all the way down to a pole in the center. And then we had a screen on the bottom of the ground. And what happened was, it's called an omnidirectional antenna. So when the signal goes out, it hits that mesh and shoots in multiple directions. So it doesn't matter which direction it goes, somebody can receive whatever is being sent. And then they have what's called a log periodic antenna, which is almost like a triangle on top of 2 towers that can spin around 360 degrees. So you aim it in the direction you want to shoot that signal. And so those were the main things that we supported to that facility, but we were also loaned out, which seems like military seem to be loaned out all the time. You are never really in your career field that long. You're usually loaned out. So we were loaned out to E&I groups out of North Dakota. So I was in Nebraska, Kansas, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana. A lot of the stationary towers that you see on most of the interstates in those states, those towers were built by us, by me and the gentlemen and women that I worked with. So there was a lot of pride in there. Actually, I comment on it. There's a hotel in Bismarck, North Dakota. There's a hotel right now where one of those towers actually sat. So they actually demolished the tower, one of the largest towers that was in Bismarck. They demolished it in the late 90s and replaced it with a hotel. So,
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you and I went in to active duty around the same time,
yes, sir.
sometime in 1990, and you were in the latent phases of the pre-internet. You were in the pre-internet. I mean, we both were, right? But you were actually doing the communication equipment, the towers, the wiring, stuff like that. These big cables that are now very small. So, we're part of a generation, or at least a group of people who have seen it pre-internet and post-internet, and actually you had hands-on through the whole process and got to really see that transformation or revolution of communication as it took place. And so I think you mentioned when we talked before that you somewhere along the line you transitioned into training
I
for.
did.
Yeah. So tell us
I
more about
did.
that.
So,
Yeah.
so a lot of the individuals that come in to when you go through your tech school, you learn the basics, but when you come out, you
Mm,
have to learn your job at that facility or in that area. And so we got to the point that we needed a trainer that could be able to teach people generic or general uh, technology that was out there. So how do you run this type of cable? How do you actually put it together? What's the sequence of what it does? So, and I would say as early as 93, 94, and I transitioned into Italy. I went from Omaha, Nebraska to Naples, Italy, and I left the Air Force
nice.
in
Gain 20
in
pounds. Yeah.
1994, and I went to Italy, and I was part of NATO. I was in a NATO group. We were still all Air Force. Our entire shop was Air Force, but we were our commander was a lieutenant commander in the Navy. Our first sergeant was an Army first sergeant. I mean, we were there was it was a group of branches all grouped together with other countries as well, all in one area in Naples, Italy, is where I was at. So I was not in an Army base or an Air Force base, but we did training there as well. A lot of the interactions were on how to perform that job or that specific application.
Mm,
I did a lot of classes in Italy. I was fortunate enough that University of Maryland was offering college classes right there at the Navy base, which NAS Naples was right there. It was on the port. They've since moved their facility away from where it was the time I was there, but they actually had a U-shaped school. It was the international school, and at night they would do college classes. So I was
cool.
certified, and this was now remember this is back when everything was just starting. Microsoft was Microsoft X was the thing. There was no 11 or 10 or 8 or 7. It hadn't even come out with Microsoft 5 yet at that time. So, but I had become proficient in um, coding, so being able to write in
Mm,
COBOL, and I'm trying to think of what was
mm.
before COBOL. So there was coding that I
Fortran.
learned.
Yeah.
Yes. So as you go backwards in time, being able to learn all that. Now, ask me if I could do that today. No, I'll be the first one to tell you that I probably, if somebody asked me to write code, I would laugh at them, to be honest, because it's just not what I wasn't good
No, it's
enough at it.
changed. I mean,
Yeah.
similar in logic. My wife does it, right? And similar in logic, and actually, Chat GPT is becoming
Yes.
a side-by-side helper for
Yes.
coding because of the way it's gone. But yeah, cool.
So I
So
wound up
sorry.
teaching. I wound
Yeah.
up teaching a lot of. No, I wound up teaching a lot of the computer side of what we do, especially
Mm,
for leadership and supervision, to be able to
mm,
understand it. Um, One of the things, and when you look back, one of the things that really strikes me is I remember the day when there were only 3 colored monitors. There was purple, there was yellow, and there was green. And that was all you got for color. There isn't the color that we see now, and we wouldn't be able to have this conversation. And 1990 is when the World Wide Web actually opened up. 91 was really when it took shape, and there were networks before that. The MilNet, military network, was still active, was very active then, and the DARPA net was very active as well. So there were networks internally in the military that were still being used right before the World Wide Web happened, and that expansion into that as we moved forward. I mean, I would say 97, 98 was, everybody was actively computering at that time, but 90, 91, 92, not many people. 93, not many people were using computers unless they were forced to. Data generation, data gathering.
Y2K. Yeah, once Y2K, that was it for me when I made the transition. So cool. So you ended up training people on coding then, and
coding and
communication systems,
specific communication systems, and specifics around programs that were out there. So Windows, and trying to think of what the other one that is still being used, and it spaces my brain at the moment. What's the other operating software that's out there?
Apple.
No, not the Apple. Really
Android.
wasn't. Commodore wasn't really a viable system that the military used. I'm thinking of, instead of Windows, I'm trying to think of the other operating system that's out there and still used today on certain servers for web design. I'll think about it in a minute here as we talk through. So, but that's what I taught. I taught how operating systems work, and I did that for the military. So I did that as part of one of the things that I was loaned out to while I was in NATO. Was I taught classes for military individuals coming into the facilities and teaching them how to operate the computers that they had. So I was comfortable being in front of people as long as I knew the product, and I had a belief that that product would work. That's what I did.
Sounds like that helped you with where you are today. Yeah.
Crazy thing about Italy. So I'll tell you this about Italy. We didn't have this discussion. So in Italy, the law is that whatever is built has to fall naturally. So when you go to Italy, it's a very old country, obviously, but they don't tear down buildings. They don't, if a building is abandoned in, let's say, any town in the United States, if somebody can buy that property, the first thing they're going to do is demolish that old building and put a new building in. Well, when a building has to collapse naturally, it has to be so much collapse before they can demolish all of it. And that's the same with towers. That's the same with trees. That's the same with anything that is built or growing. You cannot chop it down. So if we had towers, let's say we had communication towers that were 100 feet tall in somebody's vineyard because we leased their land to put those towers in, those towers are rusty to death. So think of the bumper of a 1950 car that's sitting in somebody's backyard. It's been sitting there since 1950, and it's nothing but just a pile of rust. Well, if the tower's a pile of rust and we can no longer use it, we can no longer climb it, we're not allowed to touch it until it falls naturally. And so you can't replace it. You just have to. No, you can't even do that. It's illegal to do that. So here I'm going to say that it's illegal to do that. People can't see what I'm doing, but I
just bump into it by accident, right?
Yeah. Yes, if it accidentally falls. But you couldn't knock anything down. Well, the same thing went with a tree. If I have a direct sight, so microwave dishes, if you're driving down an interstate or any highway and you come by a cell phone tower and there's a round dish on it, you can see them all the time. They're just round face dishes. Those are microwave dishes, and they have line of sight. They have to physically be able to see the next dish to transmit the information between the two. And then another dish is on that tower facing another way, and it recycles that signal and keeps on sending it. Well, it's line of sight. So if a tree, as it grows, you installed it in 1982, and now we're in 1995, 96, that tree's a lot bigger than it was back when it was installed. Well, we had to get an act of Italian Congress to knock a limb off of one of the trees right there on the base that we were on. So we're physically on a base. We have to get approval from the country itself just to knock, because trees are very few and far between in the country of Italy. So any tree growing, they do not want it to be chopped down. And so by just taking a limb off, it was literally an act of Congress, Italian Congress, to get approval to chop down a limb, to just a limb, not a tree, just a limb off of this tree that was in the center of one of the bases we were at. So it was very interesting on how that worked.
Yeah, I bet.
I was in Naples
Terry,
until. Go ahead.
I just want to remind you, we have about 13 minutes left, and I want to make sure we get through the transition, your transition time out of the military, because that's really important and special about what you have to bring to the table. So if
We're
you
definitely have to cut this down. So let me
truncate
let me get to there.
summarize,
Let me get to there. So unfortunately, Alexa and the ladies are going to have a lot of time editing this to make it fit into the 45 minutes. But so I was in Naples, Italy, for NATO. I was there from 94 until the end of 97. I supported the catastrophe that happened in the old Czechoslovakia area, which is now Serbia, Croatia. So I was part of that, and I received I received commendations through that, and I'm a what do they call that? I have the service medal, so I'm I don't remember veteran, what type of veteran that is. So when I got done in Italy, I went to Eglin Air Force Base and I worked at Eglin. And you and I talked about this in the previous discussion about the airplane, the F-18 that was that crashed into the end of the runway. Yeah. And I could talk about that. So when I got to Eglin, I was close to home, number one, so I got to see my family. That was really nice. And I was there for a little over 3 years. And I actually transitioned while I was there from being what they call a pole jock or a tower builder. I went from being an information management or a antenna system specialist to going into information management and actually working in an office. And so before I transition into that, one of the things that spoke out to me, so for those that don't know, Eric had the opportunity of going to EOD school there on Eglin Air Force Base.
Had the opportunity, but I didn't take.
But he didn't go. No, he didn't take the opportunity. So one of the discussions we had was that EOD school. While I was there, where I worked, the facility I worked in was on the end of the runway, and the runway on Eglin Air Force Base is cohabitated with also the Fort Walton Beach airport. So there are two runways. The main runway was for all airport traffic, and the other runway was for military traffic. And so we were at the end of the runway for the military runway. And one day an F-18, I'm not going to say what year it was. One day an F-18 was having engine problems, and it landed on Eglin Air Force Base. And the Navy decided to send over their crew chief, and a couple of technicians to work on the plane instead of allowing the Air Force crew chief to work on it. That's what I heard. I may be lying there, but that's what I heard. And so when the F-18 was ready to take off to get back to NAS Pensacola, which was roughly a 15-minute flight for that aircraft, it went to take off. As it was taking off, the rear of the plane exploded into a fireball, and the plane crashed into the barricade at the end of the runway. At the end of the military runway is a very large set of chains to be able to stop any plane to go past that portion of the runway, because there are buildings at that end, and that is actually a road, an actually very heavily traveled road at the very end of that runway. So when the plane exploded, and the explosion was big enough that the shock wave shattered the glass of the vehicles and the building that we were in, which was several hundreds of feet away from that end of the runway. So all hands on deck when something like that happens. You don't hesitate. You go to where it happened to help. And so we jumped out and we came to this big fireball crash of this plane. They did not find they got it. The firefighters showed up. They got it under control. They got the fire extinguished. Looked for the pilot. Pilot was nowhere to be found. Assumed to be dead or burned. So we don't. They could not find the pilot. Pilot was assumed as part of the charred wreckage that they were not found. And so we went through the process of cleaning up that jet, putting it on the back of a big hauler. They had to bring in a crane to lift it up and put it on a flatbed to be able to move it out of the way. And we were part of the pickup crew to pick up pieces as they were cataloged. Once something was cataloged, we would pick them up and place them, and we're given a number and a section and all this kind of stuff for review. We would pile it up, and we went to the hangar and put the pieces. We were part of the group that put the pieces back together of the plane to make sure that all the pieces were there, to try to identify what actually happened to the plane. So that was kind of interesting. One of the things I told Eric, and he kind of looked at the shock in his voice when I told him. So this transition for 5 to 6 hours. After the 6-hour mark, it was given all clear for planes to resume takeoff from that runway. And all of the ground crew that were working around that area were also given the go ahead to start working. And one of those was the grounds crew was cutting grass around the runway. And as one of the grass cutters started in one of his big, and we're talking, these are big cutters. These aren't little lawnmowers, right along lawnmowers. These are rather large lawnmowers or cutters. He noticed something in the grass and it was moving. And he jumped down and it was the pilot. So what people didn't see was as the plane was going, the pilot ejected as the explosion happened on the F-18. So what you saw was a big blanket of flame and smoke. Whoever was watching did not see the pilot being ejected from that plane. The parachute did not open and the pilot landed in the grass. Apparently he was alive, broke both legs, pelvis, his back. I mean, there was so much that happened, but the lawn crew found him 6 hours after the crash.
Amazing.
He was unconscious but alive. So and he lived to tell his story. Well, the reason this came up was Eric was talking about going to the EOD school there and in Fort Walton Beach at Eglin, and what they did was they put the F-18 right in front of the EOD school. So the fuselage of that F-18 was sitting there for everybody to see, and it was a great conversational piece about you never know, right? You don't know what's going to happen, and you never know what's going to transpire. So working in EOD, you're dealing with explosive equipment daily, so you need to be very attentive of what's going on. That was why it was sitting there for sure.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
The transition is where I am today. So the reason I do what I do today is the transition from my previous career field, which was antenna maintenance specialist, to information management. So information management is more of an administrative role, and it's a true administrative role. 3AOs is what that was called. I was a 2E6, and then I became a 3AO. I think I said that backwards in the beginning. A 2E6 was an antenna maintenance specialist. The 3AO is an information management specialist. And their requirements deal with publications and forms. So they write most of the publications and forms that are done in the United States Air Force. They dealt with mail. So all of the classified mail and unclassified mail that came through the facilities were controlled by an information manager. So they had access to classified rooms and classified materials. They were also the frontline defense of computer equipment. So they were the hardware replacement and hardware fix. They were also any installation that had to be done to your computer. So they were the first line of defense for computer systems. So all of your staff officers and all of your staff supervisors, they relied on an information manager within their facility to take care of that. One of the other things they did was web design. So a lot of your websites back in the 90s and early 2000s were controlled and created by information managers. So when I transitioned, I went to Keesler Air Force Base, Biloxi, Mississippi for that schooling. So I went to that school and I was a brand new student, just like everybody else was. Whether you're pipeline coming straight out of basic training or a transitioning student, you went through the 3-level school, or what they call A school. And then once you got to a certain career progression, you went back for a B school, which was a lot shorter. All of that was done right there at Keesler Air Force Base. I went to the A school, the 3-level school, and I did really good at that school. I was really good at what I did, and I was suggested that I should come back and teach, and that stuck with me through the rest of my career. I went to a site once again in the middle of Asheville, North Carolina. The weather agency, the Air Force Weather Agency out of Offutt Air Force Base, Omaha, Nebraska, has a storage or a data site in Asheville, North Carolina, called the Air Force Combat Climatology Center. And so what we did was we created all the analytics there to be able to provide weather information of any kind going back statistically 250 years, to be able to provide leaders with what the weather was going to be like, or what are the options that you have. So think of Normandy, D-Day. Where would they have been if they would have had the data to say, this is your possibility of fog, this is the possibility of rain, this is the possibility of snow. That's what the center does, and I'm really proud of those folks that work there. They provide data from anything from small towns in the U.S. to a small town in Europe or Asia, to be able to provide that data. So I worked there, and I taught a lot there as well. I did a lot of data storage there and a lot of teaching specifically around Microsoft Office suite. So Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Access, Publisher. I actually got my certificate through the University of Southern Mississippi. I got my degree and I taught there first, and then I did it again when I transitioned to Biloxi. So I went from Asheville, North Carolina. I got accepted to the schoolhouse back in Biloxi, Mississippi. And so the last thing I did was, while I was in the military, was I was an instructor for both the 3-level and 7-level classes, the A class and B class, at Keesler Air Force Base for information management. So I had taught pipeline students and those that cross-train, and those supervisors and non-commissioned officers that came back through to get their refresher or supplemental training to be able to do that. So
and that
now
was
let's transition.
Like 14, 15 years total?
I did a total of 14 years and 3 months is what I did total.
Gotcha.
So
good long stint. So we appreciate
long
that.
stint,
Yeah.
and I made the choice to get out. I got out in June of 2005, and I got out for many reasons, and we could talk about them all day long. But I had the choice to stay out, and we discussed this the last time we talked. If I would have stayed in, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation today. I wouldn't be married to the woman I'm married to. I wouldn't have the kids I have. I wouldn't have the grandson that I have. So
it all worked out.
Transition. Yeah, it all worked out. So I got out in 05. I did not have a degree. So for anybody who's listening who is still in the military and considering getting out, one of the things I truly regret before getting out was having a degree that would accelerate me within the civilian sector. They're on the back wall and you can see them. I had 3 associate's degrees when I got out. And I had a teaching practicum, which is good in any state to become a school teacher. If I wanted to, it's no longer valid, but I had the opportunity, if I wanted to step into that realm. I was more into the adult teaching than I was into development teaching. I would rather have somebody and be able to hone their skills instead of teaching them their skills. So when I got out, transitioning from the military was really hard. When I got out, I did have a job, and we talked about this as well. Um, I was going to go to West Texas, and I was going to go to a military base in West Texas, and I was going to be the web designer for multiple defense contractors along with the base itself. And it was a contract position that I chose. And literally from Biloxi, Mississippi, we made it as far as Dallas, Texas, and called my contact and was informed that that position was canceled. And so I literally lost the job I was hired for in transition to that job. So I no longer got to West Texas. I even had an address. We had just rented a place there, everything to move there, and we had to make a decision in a hotel in Dallas, Texas, and we made the decision to move to back to North Carolina, Asheville, where I'd met my wife at that time, where we had met. So we lived in Asheville, North Carolina. So transitioning. So now let's go into what I do today and what transition. So coming out of the military, I had to do a lot of other things. I was a carpenter. I did a lot of subcontract work. I worked for a insurance company selling insurance. I did a lot of stuff before I got introduced to DirecTV. I went from doing side jobs and hustling per se to I got a job being a installer and trainer for a company that is contracted by DirecTV in that area to be able to install DirecTV components. And so while I was there, I got my bachelor's degree, and then I transitioned from there. I went to a call center, so I worked for a
What
business to business.
what is
Say
your
that again?
bachelor's degree in computer science then, or
No,
what?
it's in management. So I did a bachelor's in
Management.
management.
Okay,
Yes,
gotcha.
sir. Yes, sir. Because I was just trying to get a bachelor's degree, to be honest with you, because nobody would talk to me for training unless I had a bachelor's degree. And so by getting a bachelor's degree, I got introduced to a business to business company out of Greenville, South Carolina. They're headquartered out of Pittsford, which is Rochester, New York. Still are, by the way. A company called Concentrix, which is part of Synex, which is a conglomerate of business to business protocols. And Concentrix was a call center for Synex. And so my job there was technical training and soft skills training for people that answer the phone. So when you call the phone, I'll give a prime example, and I don't think they do this anymore. When Panasonic had a huge support network for all of their electrical components, this facility you would call, depending on what it is, you would get that facility there in Greenville, South Carolina, to do technical support. So they would do technical check, or if you had a Cisco system, small business Cisco systems, you would talk to them. If you owned a Mercedes and you had technical issues with your Mercedes, you may get that facility. So it really depends on what it was. And there were multiple facilities all over the world that's supported by Concentrix in multiple countries, but I work primarily in Greenville, and then I traveled to other facilities from there to be able to teach. So I was actually the physical instructor on how to teach people how to troubleshoot everything from a button not working to going deep into a schematic system to be able to break it down and have that individual work on it, depending on the depth of what they were doing. So
So
while
you leverage your experience in the military for your transition, which was challenging. It sounds like you did a
yes,
lot of different things while you got your degree, and then
yes.
you ultimately, how did you ultimately get to maintenance and reliability? What was the final, because you're there now, right, with the
Yes.
laser
So,
alignment, like what was the thing that turned you to maintenance and reliability?
so I got my master's degree while I was at the business to business call center. I have a bachelor's in adult education and training. So that was the whole
Okay.
point of what I was trying to get to. That's why I got the bachelor's in management, because I just needed a bachelor's to move into the master's arena. Um, I got introduced to maintenance and reliability through a small company called Honeywell.
Hmm.
they make a lot more than the thermostat control that's in your house. They have a turbine facility in South Carolina, and they make certain parts of a turbine motor that fits on a smaller aircraft or helicopters. And
Okay.
so I got a contract job for a development of a learning management system to track the calibration requirements of all of the operators and mechanics through the equipment that was in that facility.
Interesting.
I think I did a really good job. If you talk to the manager, and he passed away probably about 10 years ago, but he said I did a horrible job. Yeah, I don't know if he was joking or not, but that's what he said. But he still kept me on for my contract. But so the development was I was to use a system that they could integrate within their program, and I was still writing a little bit of code at that time. It wasn't a lot. I think we were at C+ by then. And so I wrote the learning management system was nothing but a proctor to be able to identify for HR and for admin to know when somebody is coming due for calibration. Once they receive calibration, once the data is entered, then it will actually track that calibration or that requirement throughout it. And so the problem was their operator transition was turnover was quite a bit at that facility, and they had no control on who was getting what for calibration training or calibration process to be able to understand how that equipment works. So I developed that learning management system. Well, that involved me, Eric, getting in with the operations group. It involved me getting with the engineering group. It involved me getting in with the maintenance group. It involved me getting in with support, shipping, you name it, and understanding those roles. And I really enjoyed what I was doing. I really enjoyed. It was a 1-year contract. I had completed the learning management system probably 4 months ahead of schedule. I still had 4 months left in my contract, and we were starting to integrate me into that facility because we were looking at changing that contract and for me being a full-time employee of Honeywell. Unfortunately, my father had a stroke, and my mom wasn't doing too well at that time. So in 2012, plus, and I will say it's because of a woman, I was dating somebody from Panama City, a high school, not a high school sweetheart, but somebody that I actually went to high school with. Her and I reconnected. And so I had an opportunity to move back to Panama City. So I canceled, instead of extending that contract with Honeywell, I moved to Panama City, take care of my father, and also continue a relationship with somebody I was having at that time. So I came back to, technically I came back to Panama City for a woman. So that's how most people would see it. But hey, it is what it is.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Veterans Connected. We will see you back for another episode very soon. In between, we hope to see you in the Veterans Connected community group, where you can meet Eric and fellow podcast guests and share with other industry veterans at MobiusConnect.com. And we hope to see you there.